All right, welcome back to the LeaderLink podcast. We're going to finish up our second mini series about why leadership development fails to accomplish the objectives people are looking for. And this is basically going to be a wrap up of the last two because it is a little bit interrelated. The only thing today we're going to cover that is unique is the role senior leadership plays in leadership development. And you might be thinking, well, sure, they're the ones writing the checks. They have the most, interest in this working for their organization. Why else would they make the investment? And what's interesting is in my doctoral research, I come across this question. I came across it many times in the literature, and the idea was that we're senior leadership is frustrated because they're making these huge investments in leadership development. I say huge. It is a fairly significant investment, not as much as you would maybe set out for management consultants, but still a big investment nonetheless. And they're frustrated because they're not seeing the results that they want. And so today in this video, in this podcast, I want to address some of those concerns and how we might be able to overcome that from the senior leadership perspective. The first thing that I want to point out is that some people are just not going to grow because they're not ready to do it. And no matter how great a facilitator or how great the speaker or how great the coach is, some people are just closed off to change. And while that's frustrating, and especially for those senior leaders who are making the investment, that's just the reality of the situation. I have had the privilege of being in a lot of rooms with a lot of different growing leaders, people all the way from brand new leaders. Some have not even fully stepped into that leadership role, all the way up to senior leaders who have been doing it for 20, 25 years. And what I've found is that there's three kinds of participants in any kind of leadership training. Now, you might recognize these from trainings you've been to, but the first one that is kind of frustrating but also kind of fun as a facilitator is what we refer to as the hostage. Now, the hostage doesn't want to be there. They're going to do everything they can to not get anything out of the training. They may be a little bit cynical. They may even be a little bit disruptive. But the hostage, they're actually one of my favorite participants because their heart is closed off. They don't want to change. And yet, more often than not, by the end of the program, they realize, okay, there's something here for me, and they no longer are a hostage. The second kind is the vacationer. In other words, this is the person who they don't have to be at their day job for the duration, whether that's a half day or a full day or a whole week or whatever the case is. And they're like, okay, if I get something out of this, cool. But if not, at least I get a break from my day. I tend to see more vacationers than I do hostages. But the kind of participant that really stands out in these programs, what I like to encourage is that not vacationer, the adventurer, the person who really wants to get something out of this. Most leaders, when they get into a position of leadership, it can be stressful because the shift from doing the work to leading others who are doing the work, it's a different set of skills, and it's one that these people are more often than not trained in. And so I see more often than not people are hungry for these kinds of leadership development skills and these ideas. Why do we have hostages and vacationers to begin with? Well, one of the key themes that we're going to talk about with senior leadership and the role that they play in leadership development is that if they have created a culture that makes people suspicious of training efforts, a culture that makes people suspicious of investing in them, we got to start at the top. We got to figure out where those gaps are. Is it because senior leadership is not embracing it? Is it because they're approaching it as a check the box? Is it because they're delegating all of their responsibility to HR, which a lot of employees don't necessarily trust HR? whatever the reason, I think there's an opportunity for senior leaders to address this and overcome it. If people don't trust the the senior leadership in the organization, they may be less willing to be vulnerable and open to that discomfort that the training will create if they embrace it. So here's what I found in my research. When senior leaders are frustrated that the training that they invest in is not worth it, we also have to look at the reasons why these trainings are not producing the desired results. In fact, my dissertation is all about how does leadership development effectiveness improve organizational outcomes? In other words, how does leadership development affect morale? How does it affect retention? How does it affect performance? How does it affect all of these different things? And one of the key themes that I found in the research is that senior leaders have a bigger part to play in this than you might expect. Unfortunately, a lot of the leadership development programs are evaluated by, do leaders like the program? Have the leaders attended the program? Have they attended all or most of the sessions to make this investment worth it? Well, while I like to see people every time that we meet, and while I like to get that 5-star Google review saying, yes, I enjoy the program, I'm more interested in how do we affect behavior change. And so a lot of the research basically shows that senior leaders are more likely to address whether people attended the program and whether they enjoyed the program rather than what organizational outcomes occurred. So here's the meat. I'm going to give you some ideas on how senior leaders can be more invested, more likely to help encourage change from leadership development. And I'm going to share just a quick story because I've got a group that's been going on for a few months. And one of the things that we recommend is that you meet with your boss after every session because we want you to essentially teach them what you're learning. Most times, senior leader has no idea what that person going through the program is learning, but also to close some gaps. So like if there's any gaps in what the leader expects versus what the person is getting out of the program, then we can address those. We also do it because we want to show these senior leaders that it really does work. And there's one person in this class we've been talking about. So a lot, I encourage them to meet with their boss, regardless of what level. If they're low frontline, we're going to meet with mid-level. If they're mid-level, we're going to meet with executive. But there's one in particular where his boss says, no, I'm going to meet with you for sure. So he's taking ownership, which I love. And so this participant going through the program has to teach what they're learning. And we were talking about expectations and the idea of how to set expectations for your team. We use 4 different buckets for that. And the idea was to meet with this next level leader to address how these expectations can be set. And in this conversation that they were having, the senior leader says, holy cow, this stuff works. To which I wasn't surprised by that, but it was cool to see a senior leader in an organization realizing this investment means something. Not every leadership development, but let's talk about some of the ways senior leaders can get involved so that leadership development is more effective. Number 1, you got to set expectations before the training begins. What is it you're looking to get out of the program through the participant? Do you want them to communicate better? What does communicate better even mean? Do you want them to boost morale? Let's get really specific on what that looks like. Do you need them to operate their time better? Or whatever the case may be, we need to get really specific on what are the main objectives that this leader needs to get out of the program. The second thing is that you got to know what they're learning. Now, it would be practically impossible unless the senior leader went through the entire training, practically impossible to teach everything to them. But it is a good idea for a senior leader to know what their leaders are learning, whether that is a next level leader or whether that's all the way at the front line. The senior leader is critical in knowing what the training consists of and what the desired outcomes are. The third thing for senior leaders to keep in mind is not only being aware, but holding people accountable to implementing these principles. See, behavior doesn't change overnight. Humans are creatures of habit. We will go, we will learn, and then if we're not careful, we'll just fall into our old habits. This happens all the time. Think of the gym. If you're a regular gym goer, the gym always gets this massive influx of people in January who have made these resolutions to get back into shape. And then by the end of January, February, we start to see it's much more emptied out because humans are creatures of habit. And if they don't set enough regular practice in this, they'll go back to their old habits, which is to not work out. So what does accountability look like in leadership development? Well, we're setting expectations. We know what the training consists of. And now we're going to be behind you and support you and encourage you. And we're going to try and give you opportunities to practice and fail. And this is a hard one for some senior leaders. See, when we learn a new skill, we're not going to be perfect out of the first time. And so we need to allow these people who are learning the opportunity to practice and fail. The next thing I would say is the reality at some organizations, not all, but some organizations, is that there are structural obstacles in the way of these leaders applying what they learn. Whether that's communication channels that get blocked, whether that's a lack of resources, whether that is siloed communication. There could be a lot of different reasons, but to the best extent possible as a senior leader, remove those structural barriers so that your leaders can get the most out of the program. Along that line, providing the resources, support, and encouragement. If you're going to make the investment to send them to leadership development and you don't provide them with support, resources, and encouragement, you're throwing your money away. All right. I hope this helped. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and let us know what you're interested in learning about in terms of leadership. Once we get through these mini-series, I'm going to be starting to answer some of those questions that are coming through in email. Don't have any questions on the comments yet. You could be the first, and we'll see you next week.